Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Book 'em Nook Show. My name is Kyle Colley and this is a special episode of Creators Talk Podcast, a podcast about book conversations with your favorite book content creators. This episode is brought to you by Book 'em, the book community's new and best way to host dynamic online book clubs. Download the app and start your book club today at www.bookemapp.com. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. My guest today is the wonderful Sam Fox. Sam is the Senior Director of Content Creation and Strategy at HarperCollins, leading social media, influencer partnerships, and brand strategies for Epic Reads and William Morrow. She is a writer, a strategist, a foodie, a mentor, an award-winning brand marketer, a dancer, a traveler, and now a college summer educator. Sam, welcome to the Creators Talk Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So you majored in both dance and English, correct?
Yes.
Very cool. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about dance and kind of how you got into it, kind of what first brought you to it, and then also just some songs for the summer you're enjoying right now.
Yeah, totally. So I feel like a lot of little kids, like their parents put them into dance classes when they're like 2 years old, and then they kind of like get over it. And I just never got over it. So that's how I got into dance. For me, like it's very much, it started as something that I was good at, and therefore it gave me confidence. And then it turned into a creative storytelling outlet for me, very similar to how writing is. For me, like my whole career, like everything that I'm passionate about really is about storytelling through art. And so dance was just one of those outlets for me. And yeah, in terms of songs of summer, so I'm actually writing a book about a dancer right now. So not the book that I have on sub, my next one. And I'm kind of trying to make it like a modern day center stage situation. And so I've been listening to like a lot of throwback music in order to just kind of like get the vibe down. So my songs right now that I'm like very obsessed with are basically anything by Janet Jackson. Okay. Specifically So Excited, I've had on repeat for the past like 2 weeks. Also Destiny's Child, Independent Women Part 1. I was very lucky to be at Beychella where she surprised everyone with Destiny's Child, and it was like the best moment ever. And then Stronger by Britney Spears, which will just always be a hit for me.
Sounds good. We'll make sure to put them all in there so when people are listening, they can, they might have a little dance break in between. But talk to us a little bit about those connections. So like dance and English and kind of how they maybe fuel your creativity now as in the work you do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I love this question because it's something that like I genuinely think about every single day, but I rarely get to talk about it. So, like I said, like the way that I look at it as a dance and English major, like I majored in storytelling, and that sounds really cringe now that I hear it, but I'm going to embrace it. It's fine. Dance and English to me are like two different mediums with similar purposes, which is expression. They're both about taking a concept or a thesis or a feeling and really just kind of sharing that in a way that can connect to other people. And might, provide new perspectives they hadn't thought about before, or make, feel seen in what they're, reading or watching. So for me, like storytelling, it's really about, I say my mentees, if any of them are watching right now, are going to like die cackling because I bring this up literally every single day. But Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, her mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors metaphor, to me, like that is what storytelling is all about. That's what reading, writing, dancing, all of these creative mediums are about. And so how that shows up in my work is that I'm always thinking about what we want audiences to get out of something that we're producing, whether it be a book itself, a piece of marketing content about a book. Do we want people to feel seen? Do we want to offer new perspectives and insights? Do we want to give them an escape? And just strategizing that approach based on the story that we're trying to tell.
And to that, how do you kind of just think about marketing a book in general? Because it's kind of to what you're saying, there's so many parts to it. Like even the lead up to it, the after kind of, how do you think about that as a whole?
Yeah. So for me, it's really always like, I say this very often, it's all about KPIs, which is key performance indicators, basically just like a fancy marketing term for goals. And so like, even with our social media content, like what I always say is that you will never see, like, even if it's just like super fun and giggly and like, not like the most serious piece of content, there will always be a goal behind it. We're never contributing to the noise. We are always trying to break through and say something. And so for me, when it comes to marketing, like every single brainstorm, what are our goals? And say we have like 3 different goals. Okay, what are the different things that we can strategize to make sure that we're hitting all of them throughout different moments of this campaign? And that's really what it all kind of ties back to.
Yeah, I want to get a little bit more into marketing, but also I'm curious, like when did you first kind of get into reading? Did you grow up a big reader, and how have like books kind of shaped your life?
Yeah, totally. So I've always been a huge reader. Transparently, though, like I was kind of obsessed with being like stereotypically popular in high school. And so I kind of had to like hide my love for reading from my friends, which is really sad to say because it's such a huge part of who I am. So I'm very here for this like reemergence of reading. I feel like this like hot girlification of reading is just like making it cool. And like if you're a reader, you're cool now. And I'm obsessed with that. But yeah, so going back to kind of early days, like I would say, you know, my family we used to read as a family every single night before bed. And some of those books that we would read were Holes, The Giver, Bridge to Terabithia. So those were like some really transformative early ones for me. I will also say like on my own, I was reading a lot of Babysitter's Club. And then that turned into like the Click series and then Gossip Girl. And then by the time I was in high school, it was a ton of John Green. I was just like in love with everything that he wrote. And I also say like, you know, I do try to encourage my mentees to like read outside of the literary canon because there are so many like masterpieces that are just more inclusive and more envelope pushing than what we were, you know, forced to read in high school. But that said, like a lot of those books really did have a huge impact on me, like Animal Farm, Infinite Jest, To Kill a Mockingbird, like for no other reason than like they gave me this confidence when I understood like what the metaphors were, or I was able to like work through really flowery language. And like, that just kind of made me realize that like my comprehension of books is something that's really exciting to me and something that I never want to like take for granted. So yeah. And then I'd say I got to college, and that's when like it really went down. Like that was when I discovered like Marilyn Robinson, Joan Didion, Virginia Woolf, and like it was on from there.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how kind of people get to reading. Because for me, like I remember struggling with reading, so it was like I didn't jump into it the way I think other people. Like now, I talk to people like, oh yeah, from day one I was reading. I was like, okay, but then you get those people that's like for me, I was a big. By the time I got to college, I was reading anything that came my way. And I always think about it like this: is like you read what you love until you love to read, right? So something kind of brings like a one book might bring you to 100 different books. Like you might find something in a book that now you go and find every book that's kind of similar in that region, or there's something that's mentioned in a book that now you're going down a different path. Like learning and reading are really unique in that way because they can connect you, and you kind of are like books start to pair with each other in a sense that way.
Exactly. Like it really is all about like finding that gateway book that just like unlocks this like magic of reading. And I also think, again, that's why it needs to be such an inclusive space, because I feel like there are so many people who would be huge readers who just don't have that gateway book that they connect with yet. And so they're waiting for that book to be out in the world, you know?
Yeah, that's good. So let's talk about this. You were working at Teen Vogue, correct? And then what were some lessons that are strategies or cultural things that you took from that and kind of brought it into the book world? Because I think that's such a unique way as how kind of pop culture and things kind of can come into the book world and make it unique in that way as well.
Yeah, totally. So like Condé Nast in general, the joke that like my Condé friends and I always make is the whole "you wouldn't last an hour in the asylum where they raised me." Working at Condé was very difficult. It's a tough environment. You're constantly reminded that if you're not the best or if you're not up to the task, someone else is, and someone else is waiting to do your job. Yep. And so I think there was just a lot of pressure in that environment. And so I hope that is a rhetoric that I did not bring with me into publishing. But what I will say is that Teen Vogue as a brand is like, will always be such a huge love of my life. I owe so much to Teen Vogue. I will always be its biggest fan. I think for me, like it shaped my understanding of and love for like fashion and how fashion and beauty can be storytelling outlets in the same way that writing and dance have always been for me. I also think that like Teen Vogue created my passion for working with young people and helping them like realize and wield their impact on the communities and spaces that they care about. I think my insistence that every single thing you ever do, say, consume, wear, read is always political came from Teen Vogue. We have this, I think that when it comes to strategy, there was a saying that we would always say at Teen Vogue, which was get you a brand that can do both. And basically what that means is that we care about shoes and lip gloss and purses, but we also care about fascism and democracy and human rights and the human rights crises that are happening all over the world right now. And like, those things don't need to be mutually exclusive. And I think that like, that's really what I took with me into the book world is like there's this idea that, people care as much about the brands that they're consuming from as they do the products that they're purchasing. I say that all the time. So it's really important to show people who you are, what you care about, where your values lie as a brand, if you expect them to trust your product recommendations. And I also think that leads to community, because when you show people who you are, you can use your platform to really bring them together around shared interests and values, which is kind of like the bread and butter of what my whole career has been, is bringing people together around shared interests.
I guess to that point, because you're talking about it a little bit, how do you kind of think about like that? I remember, especially earlier in this year, just like how people talk about, oh, books are political and stuff. And you kind of were bringing that in. You said like brands are kind of on that a little bit and thinking about that. So I'm kind of curious of how you kind of think about that, especially when you think about content strategy and how to kind of be a part of these conversations, or maybe not. I'm kind of interested in hearing how you think about that.
I think when you're a brand, like you have to kind of look at it from a two-pronged approach, which is like the people who are working on the brand itself, like we are all very like-minded, where, there's a reason we work in the book space. I think that, not too many people would work in publishing if they didn't genuinely care about the impact that books have on readers, especially young readers. And that all ties into politics, and you really can't separate them. And you shouldn't want to. But that being said, I also think that when you are working for a corporate company, you have to make sure that you're also being very brand safe, and that you're not posting something on behalf of a brand and, putting so much of yourself into it that it no longer represents the company at large. So there's kind of always that balance that you're trying to strike. And so for me, what it comes down to is just what is an opinion and what is something that can be genuinely impactful and help readers. And, if it's the latter, then we're going to run with it.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And then started with children's books and YA division in HarperCollins. How did working with like younger readers shape your approach to content and community and campaigns that you do now?
Yeah. So I think that like for me, one thing that I try to always do, that my team is always trying to do, is take a content first, commerce second approach when we're producing content and marketing campaigns, in our digital spaces. And I think that does stem from working with young readers, because they are not interested in traditional marketing strategies. They don't want to see a bunch of stock imagery with New York Times blurbs, presented as an advertisement. That's not really going to move the needle with them. It's not going to, be thumb-stopping material for them, if you will. And so I think that like, even if direct sales is the goal, even if that's the KPI behind a piece of content, there still needs to be like, you need to understand that a standard traditional advertisement in the way that we grew up seeing them is not going to lead to direct sales with this demographic. So I think that like working with young people really taught me the importance of like meeting our audiences in their spaces where they already are and getting creative around how we're telling our stories.
No, that makes sense. And speaking of kind of working with communities, one of the things I mean, I wrote about it last year because I just thought it was really, really cool. The shelves in the city thing, whole experience. I kind of want you to talk about it a little bit, like where the origin came from it and some of the things that you are improved from year one to year two. Because I just remember seeing it and I was like, wow, this is so creative. And I thought it was so interesting to see all these content creators come together and kind of do in real life experiences. So I'd love to hear kind of how that idea came about and what you kind of learned from year to year.
So for me, like coming from a place like Condé Nast, I think that like brand trips were so the norm. So like, you know, there were always fashion, beauty, lifestyle, entertainment brands that were doing these types of trips with our editors and with our influencers. And I was seeing the impact that it was having in real time. Like I would see how like these events could really create connections and you know had these editors and influencers really talking about the experience and therefore talking about the brand in a really positive light. So when I came to publishing, like I was already very familiar with those types of brand trips,
Yeah.
but I don't think that they were as popular in the book space because I don't think that book influencers have been around quite as long as they have in some of those other spaces. Like I think, you know, like the book talk boom of 2020 really kind of cemented this like content creation space in the book world. So it's a little bit behind some of the other industries. So yeah, like I would say with Shelves in the City, to be totally honest, I don't remember who came up with the idea to do a big brand event. Like, I'm not going to take credit for it. I don't think it was my idea. But I do know that it was something that our entire leadership team was really excited about and like on board to try. So when we did the first one in 2024, and I think it was just amazing. Like it was my favorite thing in the world, just like seeing all of these creators coming together and like the joy that created for them. Just like it was the bookish weekend of our dreams. But I think that the main thing that I learned from the first one was that we don't necessarily need to program every single minute of the trip. You know, there was like no free time the first year. Like we were like really just like go, go, go with all of these activities. So I think when we did round two, we tried to you know, really kind of have a lot more free time for attendees, just hang out with each other, read, explore the area, things like that.
Yeah.
And then I also think a big change from year one to year two was that we made the second iteration really all about coming together for the LA community following the January wildfires. And I think that obviously that was a pretty reactive decision. It was something we decided to do after the wildfires happened because we genuinely felt that it was our responsibility if we were going to be in that space. And it was just something that we all deeply cared about and wanted to contribute to. But I think that we learned how fulfilling it can be to kind of give back to the communities where we're staying as a group during these trips. So I think that one thing we're going to continue weaving in is that kind of service-based, you know, activities in addition to social ones.
Yeah, I thought that was so cool. Like from what I could see, it was you know, you did food packaging and you filled up libraries and worked with reparations club, a library or independent bookstore out there. I just think those type of events just kind of like you said, it creates culture, it creates identity, and it creates ability for content creators to really then build other things, right? Because I think a lot of times with content creators, you then have opportunity to do like book clubs together or podcasts, and all these things spin from having those moments of community. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about like how you all thought about diversity, because I think because you guys kind of went from like 40 people to like maybe 120 plus creators, which also brought in a lot of different voices and conversations. So how did you, and I think it did a really good job of presenting I guess for lack of better words, like diaspora or whatever for content creators, a lot of range in it. So how'd you think about that, and how'd you all kind of make that an emphasis?
You know, I think for me, like it's just really hard to explain like how much it means to me when people talk about and praise the diversity of that event, because it's something that my whole team and I and like every single staff member who was part of it just like deeply and personally care about. So it's really great to see that came through and that people recognized that. But that said, like curating an inclusive event of book talk creators was not difficult. And I feel like, people act like it's like this hard thing to do. It's not at all, because both book talk and the reading community at large are extremely diverse spaces. Like, to your point, when you're having an event that's supposed to be, representative or reminiscent of this larger community, you want it to, have every identity that's within that community be part of it, because like it just makes sense to do it that way. And I think that like if you're not seeing like these diverse spaces on your For You page, then you're likely only following like a very small corner of this community. I think that every creator that we invited was someone that our team members were already following or had already worked with in the past. And they were all people who are so creative and have fun with their content and engage in meaningful and necessary discourse that make people think and gain new perspectives, which is really the point of reading. And they also were all just like the kindest, friendliest, most welcoming people who make book talk the wonderful community that I think it can be. It was really just important to us to include creators who reflect the reading community at large. That includes people with different races and ethnicities, genders and sexualities, religions, abilities, disabilities, following counts, platforms, all of it. And I also think beyond the guest list itself, because I think it's one thing to just make sure that you're being inclusive with your guest list, but that needs to then translate into the event itself. So it's also really important that we're making necessary accommodations as best as we can. We're paying attention to those little details so that all of the attendees there feel welcomed and included and like they belong in those rooms, because every single one of them belong to be there.
No, that's good. I'm glad you pointed that out too, because even from day one, I noticed even the following count. Because I think sometimes people are like, oh, if I can only get to this amount, I'll get into this influencer program. I'll be able to get this opportunity. But I think it does. Sometimes following count can be not as important, just because sometimes you can have 100 or 200 people, but they follow. We kind of like, we always talk about it at Book. I'm like, you want 100 people that love you, like that just like love and die and bleed your brand, right? And I think sometimes when you have those smaller creators, they have that, like they are their people's go-to person, right? Because they're like, okay, anything that Sarah does, I'm going to read her book all day. I mean, I'm gonna go and read all those books. So I thought that was very interesting as well.
Totally. And it's interesting that people put so much emphasis on following counts, because for me, like when I'm scrolling on Instagram or on TikTok, like I'm scrolling. And so what I'm seeing is the content. Yeah. I'm not seeing how many people follow you at any given time, So like what I care about is what you're putting out in this space, more so than how many followers you've amassed.
Yeah, and I'm also curious, like, how do you kind of think about like ROI, like when it comes, or like return on investment, I guess, when it comes to like running a big event like that? Because I know with some brands, like for example, like if I was doing a coffee shop, I could kind of be like, okay, if people come there, they're gonna go buy. But I don't know if I necessarily go to a bookstore and like, hey, I'm gonna go pick up a HarperCollins book today. I don't think that's how we think, but we do are like, I'm gonna pick up this author's book or that person's book. And so I'm kind of curious how you think about that from like maybe from an author standpoint on the ROI, and then like just from like a creator standpoint, like do you think that like also eventually translates to like more creators having a favorable love for HarperCollins or kind of those? I'm just kind of curious how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like shelves, like first and foremost, was just this like bookish weekend of our dreams. And it really was an opportunity for us to say to this community of creators, like, hey, we see you. You are moving the needle in book sales in a very impactful way. Like they're already doing the work. We like, especially again, that book talk boom of 2020, like a book would trend on TikTok and then we would see a significant increase in sales. And so like, that's already happening. So a lot of this is just about acknowledging that impact and sort of like, I guess for lack of a better term, like giving them their flowers, if that makes sense. But obviously, we are a business. ROI is very important. And I want to note that all of the attendees like were fully aware and acknowledge that ROI is important and that we're a business. Like, I don't think anyone's trying to like mask that in any way. So I just want to put that out there. But yeah, so like, I think that like, like I said, brand trips are nothing new, but they're a lot less common in publishing. So when our team produces something like this, we're really showing that we're adaptable, we're being innovative with how we value these bookish creators. We take their impact seriously. We want to treat them the same way they'd be treated if they were creating content, on behalf of any other industry. And I think by doing so, we are creating positive brand affinity and recognition. I think that they know the teams behind the books that they're hyping up on their channels. And I also think that, like, by spending a whole weekend of bookish activities together, like, both of our teams and our authors are building stronger connections with these creators. And so, like, it also just makes our partnerships, A, more fun, and B, enables us to really come from a place of empathy when we do paid partnerships with them, or, review mailings for our books and things like that, or, smaller events, or, author tours, all of that kind of stuff. Because I think that, like, if we know them better, then I think that when we're brainstorming concepts that we can partner on, we're able to be a lot more authentic, and we're able to sort of understand, like, what's going to move the needle on their platforms versus on our platforms, and just kind of having that dialogue. Yeah. And I also think, like, so this is, like, one thing that I say all the time. I said this at NYU when I was giving my lecture the other day. So if you're, like, walking down the street in New York City and you run into, like, a huge celebrity, and that celebrity, like, stops to have a conversation with you, and it's, like, a really great, positive conversation, like, A, props, like, that's very cool. But also B, the next time that celebrity comes out with, like, a big movie or an album, you're probably going to be more likely to go to the theater and watch that movie or to buy that album, because you're going to remember that conversation and you're going to feel a connection to them. Yeah. And so that's why I think it's so important to be connecting these creators who have such important impact in this space with our authors.
No, that's well said. It's that affinity that you're talking about. Like that, once it brings you become somewhat of a champion, just because you're like, I love what you all stand for and how you think about things. And to that point, because you brought it up a little bit, like, how do you kind of define community, right? Because you're talking about kind of making sure, like, your events have that in there. But when you're kind of thinking about community as a large, like, how do you kind of think about defining it and cultivating it and making it, a place that people want to be a part of?
Yeah, definitely. I think, so for me, like, community is basically a group of people that come together over shared interests, values, identity facets, and basically affinities, like we mentioned. And I think that a strong book community feels like a group of readers and writers who hype each other up and want each other to succeed, and will speak highly of each other in the community, like, even when someone isn't in the room. I think that's really important. If someone's in your community, you're going to be saying great things about them and hyping them up, even if they aren't there to hear it. And I think that, like, I also think that communities, it's important that you're able to have serious, safe, impactful conversations and discourse, like, without toxicity or judgment. Yeah. That also means not giving anyone a reason to judge. And, I also think that, like, another factor of community is being able to be super unserious and, like, yap about silly tropes and vibes and bookish moments that make us feel warm and cozy and kick our feet, like, do both. And I think for me, like, when I think of community, what it always kind of comes back to is, and I say this not as like oh, poor me. Like, I think a lot of people can empathize with this and have experienced this, but, like, I know what it feels like to be bullied, as a little kid. And I think a lot of people know what it feels like to be bullied. And so for me, the feeling that you should get from your community is the opposite of that feeling. It's the opposite of what it feels like to be bullied. That's kind of what I always try to think of it as.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And even kind of what you're talking about with even the ability to have fun and play with it, it's kind of like what you're talking about with dance, like the ability to improvise and enjoy the moment and create that place where people feel safe and enjoy to express themselves as well. Yeah, I want to shift a little bit into more like authors too, because I think so often we talk a lot about content creators, but I think authors and how you all think about branding around them makes a lot of sense too. So how should authors be thinking about marketing their own books, like today? Like, what's one of those things that, like, every author should kind of prioritize, like, no matter what platform they are? Kind of how do you think for authors in general how they should think about presenting themselves on the online?
I think that's a really good question. Like, I often have authors asking me if they need to be creating TikTok videos and hopping on trends in order to really market their books. My answer is always no. And I think that surprises people. And the reason my answer is no is because, like, this, it's not because those trend videos don't do anything. Like, we've seen enough proof that they absolutely do. I myself enjoy making them, especially now that I'm kind of entering my author era. I've been leaning into them a lot more. So, it's very much fair game to say that those videos do move the needle. But I think that if leaning into those trends doesn't feel authentic for the author, makes them feel like they aren't being themselves, and then I think that they're only doing themselves a disservice. I think that, like we've talked about, readers want to know whose books they're consuming. So when it comes to author strategy, it's really about like showing who you are. And so that could be by hopping on book talk trends, but maybe it's also by posting an Ask Me Anything and making like a notes carousel or video to answer questions. Maybe it's using Instagram as like your own personal diary, which is something that I tend to do. Just sharing like silly little snapshots of your daily life that you think nobody else cares about. Maybe it's like using your experience and skills to share advice with aspiring authors, because we know that so many readers are also writers. It could even be as simple as like posting a photo or a graphic or sharing something, that talks about your favorite book or a book that you've read recently that you're really into. And then I think outside of social media, when looking at like which events to try to attend or what merch to create or what early excerpt from your book you want to like release, all of that kind of stuff. Again, I'm such a broken record, but it comes back to the KPIs. It comes back to the goals. So like, are you trying to get direct sales for your book? Are you trying to make connections with other authors who might blurb your book? Are you trying to generate awareness before your book goes on sale? Then figure out what your goal is. Then put yourself in your reader's shoes. What would convince you to blurb someone else's book? Or what would catch your attention and make you want to pre-order something, and strategize from there? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to marketing, like, every single one of us is also a consumer. So it's pretty, we can strategize and we can learn all the skills, but sometimes it's as simple as just putting yourself in the consumer's shoes.
That's good. And then from also think of from like more of it, like introvert authors, how do they kind of should they take the route of like, hey, should I work with? I see these influencers out here. Maybe they can get my book out there more. Like, how do introverted authors kind of make sure that they still are, as you kind of said, I think you alluded to a lot, but I'm curious how you think about that as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Like, I personally am an extroverted extrovert. So sometimes something that seems so simple, with putting yourself out there, can be really scary for an introvert. And I think that a lot of authors, like, they're so comfortable when they're in this very secluded space writing, and then they're a lot less comfortable once their book is out in the world and they're expected to put themselves out there. So I think that like leaning into platforms where they don't need to be the ones kind of front facing. So I think leaning into creators is huge. Like DMing creators, talking about doing partnerships with them, asking if they, if you can send them a free copy of your book, all of that kind of stuff. That said, one thing I will always caveat with creators is that if you want a guaranteed post, like if you're doing a partnership where like they have to post something, it is very important that you pay them. This is their job. It's not just like a fun hobby for most of them. So like, that's just one thing. Make sure you're budgeting accordingly if you are going to be working with creators. But yeah, I think that and I also think that because they're so comfortable as writers, how can you lean into that when it comes to the marketing side of it, right? So maybe it's even just like posting a bunch of quotes from your book that you think will really connect with people. It can be something that simple. Like, I think you can utilize your social media without having to like showcase yourself in that same way.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's, I think that makes, I always think about that too for authors. I like there's a great way of just using what you already, I think, Elisa, how I think about it is like, how do you make one piece of content stretch? Like, how can you make so like, even when I think about like podcasts, and I'm like, how can I continue to give value through this that allows it to be short form, that allows it to be long form, everything in between. But when it comes to authors, like a blog post then becomes a tweet. a blog post then becomes a TikTok because now you can take that and turn it into something. So I always think about that as well.
I mean, we just launched a video podcast series on Avon. It's called The Book Was Hotter. It's awesome.
Awesome.
And that is something that, and again, like I don't take credit for this. Like I'm part of it, but there are people who are doing much more work on it who are like really killing it. But I think that is an approach that we really take is like, what are like 12 pieces of content that we can get out of every single podcast? How do we kind of create longevity out of this?
Yeah, and speaking of like extroverted, how do you all think about kind of like those big campaigns where I think about something like what's it called, summer in the city, right? Where you have this this coffee truck, and then you have the big book. Like, how do you all kind of think about those type of marketing campaigns for authors that have like I guess larger reaches and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, the Summer in the City campaign is like next level. It was awesome, and it still is. I, again, will not take credit for that. The lead marketer and publicist absolutely crushed it with that campaign. I'm very proud of them. I'm very in awe of them and all of the work that they did. I also give the author a lot of credit for that one because like every time we pitched her a social concept or, a content idea, she had such a strong handle on her own platforms and her relationship to her readers that she knew what would work and what wouldn't. So we had that kind of like, it was less trial and error. It was more like we knew exactly what was going to work. And I think that made the campaign a real collaboration as well. But, I think again, like, everything comes back to the goals of the campaign. Yeah. So before every brainstorm, determine what the goals are, whether that be pre-orders, direct sales, awareness, reaching a specific niche audience, and then, come up with ideas that will cover each of those goals at every pivotal moment of the campaign. So some goals will need to be bigger, buzzier, splashy, or some ideas will need to be bigger, buzzier, splashier if the goal is just like massive awareness, Yeah. But then also if the goal is like, reaching a very specific audience, then we might do some smaller scale things. So it really is kind of a culmination of all of it that I think leads to a successful campaign.
Yep, it's like you said, KPI, KPI, KPI. If you focus on those, then you're making sure you're knocking them out, and then you're going to be happy with the results because you're going to make sure that you're kind of moving up each week and you're getting it right. So I love that you kind of have said that over and over again because I think it's so important.
I'm like the most annoying person ever, but it's true. Like there is no ROI without a goal,
Yeah, no, exactly. I want to get a little bit into your writing, but I do want to ask, like, well, what kind of content are you just enjoying on social media right now, especially like book content? Like, what are you excited you're seeing? And then maybe are there any trends that you're like, all right, I've seen this a lot, and I'm not as excited about?
Yeah. So personally, like I love the intersection of pop culture and book marketing. I think that's because my whole career has been very focused on pop culture. So like if I see a post comparing like a book to a TV show I've been obsessed with lately, so right now, my 3 shows that my whole team is so sick of me because I don't stop talking about them are Forever, Overcompensating, and Adults. I'm obsessed with these 3 shows. Like, I just can't get enough of them. And so like, if I see a post that's like tying a book to one of those shows in a way that's like, oh yeah, then that to me like really, really clicks and really hits. I think if there's like a lyric from a song everyone's been singing all summer, like, Man-Child came out yesterday, so I'm expecting a lot of bookish content around that, or like memifying a celebrity moment with a nod to a book. Like when I see that stuff, like I know what vibes you're bringing to the function and I'm like very into it. Like basically I want like the Evan Ross Katz of the book world. Like I want it to make me laugh, make me think, make me learn something about what to expect from the book. And just like say something in an unserious way. Cause I think that's a skill in and of itself that people like underestimate a lot.
No, I think that's true.
And in terms of like a trend that I'm over or like kind of sick of, I think every trend, like, eventually it's 2 things. Like every trend has its moment and kind of like ends. But at the same time, if you do it really well, you can always bring it back. Like you can always be fashionably late if you like, disrupt the noise with it. But in terms of like something I'm just sick of seeing on Book Talk, I think it's people saying that reading shouldn't be political. I think it's people trying to, like basically like lean into sliding glass doors only and not focus on the importance of mirrors and windows. I see a lot of that, and I'm kind of like, ignorance is never bliss. I don't know that we want to lean into that.
Yep. Well, speaking of that and getting to hear that, I would love to hear. I first want to say congratulations on your new book. Or congratulations on the upcoming book and signing with the literary agent for sure. I also want to hear like how's that's going and how writing's been for you.
Yeah. So since I signed with my agent, like I genuinely like still like it's been a couple months now and I still feel like I'm going to throw up, but like in a very good way. But yeah, so like for me, like writing's always come very natural for me. I started my career in editorial, like writing think pieces and lifestyle content for publications like HuffPost and BuzzFeed. But I really didn't start writing like long form stories until I stopped dancing. Because for me, like I needed that creative outlet. I needed to kind of scratch that storytelling itch that I couldn't get anymore when I was no longer dancing. And I just really, really fell in love with writing books. I've actually written a few books. And, because I think that like, you have to practice. Like you're not going to be amazing the first time you try something. And so I didn't want to like be super egotistical and think that I could like write one book and it was going to be a hit. Yeah. So I really did practice. I wrote a couple and I shelved them and I didn't feel that they were strong enough to query, but I chalked it up to practice. And so I finally wrote something that I felt was strong enough that might be worthy of publication. And that's when I decided to query. And I think that like my goal was to just see my name on a book on a shelf in a store somewhere. Like that is the goal. That is still the goal. That would like to see that would just be the biggest dream come true. And I know so many people can relate to that. But also like now that I've signed with like the coolest agent ever who represents so many incredible authors, it can be really hard not to think about how much my life could change if I do get a book deal. I think that that's like really exciting. It's also really anxiety provoking. I'm trying to like manifest this for myself in a very public way, which is also something I haven't done before. Like I've usually been a little bit more guarded about things that I really want. And so like, I'll be embarrassed if I don't end up getting a deal since I've told the whole world that I'm on sub. But I also know that if that happens, I will be okay. That rejection would lead to a new sense of empathy because if nothing else, I always say that in every experience, you can gain empathy from it. And then that might lead to writing an even stronger book and trying again. So I'm just trying to remind myself of that while I'm in this kind of hell of being on sub.
No, those are good principles and good things to bring to the mind. I think building in public is always fun and also very challenging and, very public facing, it kind of, especially when you're with art, right? Because I think so much of the artist is like, you want it to be personal which allows it to be general for other people. Like what kind of experiences you go through, other people can relate to. So as an artist, a lot of times you are kind of like, keeping it close to the chest, but then you almost have to show it to the world. Otherwise, you got to kind of keep risking failure, right? You have to be willing to kind of keep going out there and putting yourself out there, regardless of outcomes sometimes. And I think that's what makes artists great. That's what makes writers and authors and everything in between. That's what makes them unique.
I totally agree. Like it is uncomfortable and, can feel very, very, very anxiety provoking. But I think it's so important. I think it's honestly part of the artistic process.
Yeah. Do you think it's hard to so since you're in publishing and you kind of have like, the flow of how books are going and how they're marketed, all that, all that in the end, but being in the work, like how do you kind of compartmentalize all that to make sure you're like, all right, my marketing brain, my strategy brain is not touching this writing brain that I'm just like being creative in? How do you kind of do that?
Yeah, no, totally. I think that like working in publishing should make it like you would think it makes it easier to write like a best-selling novel, right? Because you have all of the internal insights. Like you can strategize, you can lean into the tropes, the micro tropes, the genres that are really succeeding in the market. You can write the concepts that easily translate into trending social media content, like all of it. But in true artist fashion, like I did not do any of those things. I threw my strategy hat out the window and I wrote a story that just felt real and personal to me, and that I hope will resonate and make readers feel seen. I really do think there's a time and a place for strategy, and within the art itself isn't always it. I'm confident enough in my strategy skills to know that I can find the angles and approaches to make my book marketable. But the story itself came from a place of curiosity and exploration and wanting to know if other people feel the same way I do about all of these questions that I have all of the time that are just like eating my brain away. And so I think that I kind of had to I almost tapped into like my reader brain when I was writing, because I think that's also a really cool thing about working in publishing, is that like even when I'm reading a book for work, I forget that I'm working because I just go into the book. And I'm a very like for me, like when I'm writing, I'm not in my living room. I'm not sitting in this chair. Like I am on the street with my characters in whatever coffee shop they're in. Like, like it's really just about like putting yourself in it. I think that's what I had to do.
And are your characters just kind of talking to you throughout the day too, where you're like, oh crap, I gotta go put that down? Or how do you kind of do that too?
Yeah. So for me, it's less that I don't necessarily have conversations with them. Like I know a lot of authors will be like, oh, like my characters are my friends. Like my main character, I will protect at all costs. Like she has become like my little sister, and like I genuinely love her. And so I do feel that like protectiveness. But I wouldn't say that I'm like constantly like yapping with her in my head. But what does happen a lot is that lines will pop into my head at like any given time. The two places that it happens most frequently are in the shower and when I'm at the gym. Because I think that's when like my brain is turned off and it just lets things pop in. So like my husband makes fun of me so hard because the number of times I will be in the shower and the shower's still running, and I like wrap a towel around myself, run through our apartment to go to my laptop and jot down whatever line is in my head, and then go back into the shower. Like that is a daily occurrence in our home.
See, happens all the time. I mean, because you just never know when inspiration is going to strike. I know that. I know exactly how you're feeling. Talk to me a little bit about like when it comes to your writing process. Like, what's a perfect day look like, and kind of when do you feel like I'm in a good flow as a writer?
Yeah. So this is the part where I am very strategic, because I have a day job, so I can only write nights and weekends. And I made a rule for myself that when I'm in the writing portion of a book, I have to write at least one chapter a week, never more than 2 chapters a week. Same thing for editing. When I'm in the editing portion of a book, I have to edit 1 chapter a week, never more than 2. I am like a very, very disciplined person. I think that's because of my dance background. Like I always say, regardless of the industry, like hire dancers. We will not disappoint. So, I'm not much of a procrastinator. I'm not someone who needs to do like a whole routine to get into the writing mood. Like I really do approach all of my work with like a just do it mindset. So I can really just kind of jump in. But I am someone who knows what burnout feels like. And I think that it is so important to actively avoid burnout. And that's why I have that 2 chapter limit, because I think that it can feel really great to like sit down and churn out 10 chapters in one sitting. But what doesn't feel great is for the next 2 weeks, you can't write anything because writing out those 10 chapters completely drained you. So I think that like having strategy in that regard is something that I do take very seriously.
Yeah, I know. I think having a writing schedule is so important. Let's talk a little bit about your reading as we kind of wrap up. What's the last book you read? What are you reading now, and what do you plan to read next?
Okay. Last book, Jessica Knoll's Bright Young Women. A coworker recommended it to me. She was like, oh, the protagonist's practicality after a murder in her sorority house reminded me of you. And I take that as a compliment. I feel like a lot of people wouldn't, but I'm proud of that. So that's my most recent read. I am currently reading Can't Get Enough by Kennedy Ryan. I have seen it all over social media. So I ran and picked it up on pub day, but I have not gotten to it yet. So I'm really excited to dive into it. And then, I'm sorry, I have gotten to it. I'm like a few chapters in, but I want to finish it. So I'm hoping to finish it this weekend. And then next, I have a few on my TBR. It's obviously Pride Month, so I'm trying to only read Pride books this month. I obviously read queer books all year, but trying to only read them in June. So I've got Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, which I stole from The Office. Winging It With You by Chip Pons, since that comes out very soon, which is super exciting. And I actually was just at the center for a meeting, and I picked up The Broposal by Sonora Reyes while I was there. So I'm excited to dive into that one too.
Sounds good. Let's get into some rapid fire book questions. What's a book that not enough people are talking about right now?
A book that not enough people are talking about right now, The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Okay. All right. What is a favorite? Okay, I haven't read it yet. I know I need to. I remember it blowing up last year. I need to check it out. What is a favorite book you like to gift to somebody?
Nothing Burns as Bright as You by Ashley Woodfolk.
Okay, sounds good. What is it like? What's one author when they drop a book, you have to go get it, like no matter what?
Carly Fortune for me. I really, really love hers.
Sounds good. And then what book should we buy from the bookstore this week?
What book should you buy from the bookstore this week? I'm like, okay, what is recently pubbing? Let Them Stare by Julie Murphy and Jonathan Van Ness.
Perfect. Love to hear it. We'll make sure to put all those down below. How we always end this podcast, Sam, you can answer it however you want. It's a two-sided question, but the first part of the question is, what would you like to see more of in the book world?
Again, broken record. I would like to see more diversity in the book world. I think that I have always been able to see myself in main characters. And I think that if everyone could see themselves in main characters, the world would be a very different place. And a much better place.
And what would you like to see less of in the book world?
Less gatekeeping, less book banning, and again, less sort of dismissing the political aspects of books.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sam. It's been a pleasure. Please let us know anything that's coming up in your world, anything that we can support, or just where we can find you on the internet.
Awesome. Okay. At Sam Bam Fox is my handle on Instagram and TikTok. And follow Epic Reads and William Morrow and Avon and Voyager.
Perfect. Sounds good. We'll make sure to put them all in the description below. Sam, it's truly a pleasure talking with you, and just thank you for your conversations and everything you brought. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for reaching out. This was awesome. This was so fun.